Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. They say the Space Marines are the ultimate warriors, gods of battle forged in the gene labs of the Emperor himself. We see them in murals, hear their names sung in chapel hymns, and watch endless reels of their thunderous victories echoing across blasted wastelands. But beneath the roar of bolters and the clash of chainswords, there's a silence the Imperium cannot explain. A silence filled with questions. Why do so many of their campaigns end in retreat? Why do planets purged by Astartes fall silent forever? And why, in the deepest reaches of the galaxy, are the Space Marines always moving, always advancing but never staying? This isn't about failure. This isn't about cowardice. It's about something worse, a truth too grim for even the Imperium to speak aloud. The Adeptus Astartes, these transhuman paragons of war, are not running from enemies. They are running from inevitability, from extinction, from the grave silence of a galaxy that no longer wants them. They are running because behind them, the darkness is rising, and they are the only thing standing between that abyss and the last flickering light of human survival. Every child on a hive world grows up hearing stories of Terra's glory, of the Golden Throne and the Emperor's undying majesty. They are taught that the Imperium is vast, eternal, unyielding. But this is a lie so deeply embedded in the heart of humanity that to question it is heresy. The reality, buried beneath layers of dogma and soot, is that the Imperium is not growing, not expanding, it is decaying. The Age of Imperium is not an era of conquest but of decline. And the Space Marines, once the instruments of expansion, have become caretakers of a dying empire. They are sent not to conquer but to stall, to delay the inevitable, to hold the line against a tide that cannot be stopped. There was a time when the Emperor's dream was real. During the Great Crusade, humanity surged across the stars like a wildfire, pushing back Xenos, unifying worlds, building cathedrals and cities in the vacuum of space. The Astartes were the vanguard of this dream. A dream of unity, of purpose, of dominion. But that was 10,000 years ago. Today, that dream is a rotting corpse propped up by incense and prayers. The Imperium cannot build, it cannot innovate. Its cities are crumbling, its technologies barely understood relics, its populations oppressed and ignorant. Entire sectors go dark without explanation. And still, from Terra, the edicts go out. Hold the line, recapture this world, silence that rebellion. As if it matters. As if there's still something left to save. Space Marines are not deployed where they can win. They are sent where collapse is imminent. A forge world besieged by Genestealer cults? Send the Salamanders. An agri world overrun by orcs? Dispatch the Raven Guard. A shrine world swallowed by warp rifts? Let the Grey Knights burn it clean. But none of these deployments are strategic. They are symbolic. The Astartes fight not to change the tide, but to keep up appearances, to show the faithful that the angels of death still walk among them. Behind the heroic veneer lies desperation. The victories they claim are Pyrrhic. Their triumphs measured in minutes bought, not enemies slain. And yet, the truth is more painful still. Space Marines do not retreat because they are overwhelmed. They retreat because they are stretched thin, too few to hold what must be held. There are only 1,000 chapters, each a mere 1,000 warriors strong. 1 million Astartes to defend 1 million worlds. It's arithmetic, not cowardice, that drives them back. They cannot be everywhere. They cannot save everyone. And so they do the only thing they can. They make every deployment a delaying action. Every assault a distraction. Every death a message. We are still here. We are still fighting, even as the walls fall inward. This is why so many of their campaigns are one-way journeys. Not because they hope to win, but because they know someone must go. To hold the gate for a little longer. To remind the enemy that humanity still has teeth. Entire chapters have vanished into the void this way. Gone to war and never returned. The Astral Knights ramming their battle barge into a Necron world engine. The Celestial Lions crippled and nearly wiped out for speaking truth to power. The Lamenters, cursed and cast aside, bleeding out on forgotten fronts. These aren't tales of glory. They're eulogies, testaments to an empire that demands sacrifice but offers no salvation. It is no wonder then that the Space Marines are always in motion. Their ships rarely dock for long. Their fortress monasteries are often mobile, orbiting, watching, waiting. They are like sharks. If they stop, they die. If they stay, they rot. The galaxy they fight for does not want them to stay. It cannot sustain them. There are no safe harbors. Only endless battlefields stretching from Segmentum Solar to the Ghoul stars. They are angels of war with no heaven, only purgatory. And yet they fight, because what else can they do? They were made for this. Engineered not just for strength, but for loyalty, for obedience. Even as the Imperium collapses around them, they follow orders. Even as worlds fall and stars die, they advance into the fire. They are not defenders of a golden age, they are the pallbearers of a failing one. Carrying the weight of a dream that died 10,000 years ago and pretending it still lives. Running not from fear, but because the galaxy is crumbling behind them, and someone must hold the line until the very end. To most citizens of the Imperium, the warp is merely a method of travel. Mysterious, yes, but essential. Ships disappear into its depths and emerge light years away, the miracle taken for granted by those who live and die without ever leaving their world. But the truth, as always, is far darker. The warp is not merely a sea, it is a storm without end, a realm of nightmares given form, thought made flesh, madness incarnate, and it is bleeding into reality. What was once a tool is now a cancer, metastasizing across the galaxy, distorting time, space, and reason. Space Marines, whose task it is to travel this infernal ocean more than any other, are not just warriors, they are drowning men, struggling to keep humanity above the waves. The Cicatrix Maledictum changed everything. When the Great Rift split the galaxy in two, it was more than a cataclysm, it was a revelation. The thin veil that separated real space from the immaterium tore open, and entire sectors were engulfed in living hell. Planets blinked out of existence. Fleets vanished mid-transit. Demons poured forth unchecked, not as invaders, but as inevitabilities. And the Space Marines, charged with containing this eruption, found themselves not holding a line, but trying to patch holes in a sinking ship with their bare hands. Within the warp, time loses all meaning. A voyage meant to last days might stretch into centuries, or conclude before it begins. Entire chapters have been lost in transit, declared dead only to reappear generations later, warped and unrecognizable. The Flesh Tearers, the Blood Angels, even the Ultramarines have tales of missions that ended in madness or mutation. Space Marines endure this because they must. They steel their minds, chant litanies, surround themselves with purity seals and sacred relics. But none of it matters in the end. The warp does not care how pure your soul is, only how loud it can scream when torn apart. And as the warp seeps further into reality, even worlds that have never known void travel are tainted. Warp storms strand entire systems, cutting them off for centuries. Psychers erupt into flames, dreams become doorways, and the demonic follows. Space Marines are often sent not to reclaim, but to burn, to scour planets infected with corruption, to eliminate populations too far gone. Cleansing flame becomes mercy. Orbital bombardments become kindness. Because sometimes the only way to stop the warp spread is to erase the canvas. The psychological toll is immeasurable. These are warriors raised to believe in the sanctity of their mission, the righteousness of their cause. But how do you fight something that cannot die? How do you purge a madness that infects the very air? It is not uncommon for Astartes to return from campaigns against chaos changed. Not in body, but in gaze. Veterans who once shouted war cries now whisper prayers under their breath. Captains consult chaplains, not for guidance, but for confession. Because they have seen the edge of the galaxy and it is not filled with stars but with screaming. Even the most stalwart chapters are not immune. The Dark Angels harbor secrets that would shatter the faith of entire sectors. The Space Wolves, those paragons of feral loyalty, have faced demonic incursions that question the very foundation of their creation. The Grey Knights, the Emperor's final safeguard, know that they too are merely delaying the inevitable. They are not winning. They are managing. They are holding horrors in check, not for victory, but for survival. Every demon banished is a placeholder for another. Every exorcism a temporary reprieve. And so the Astartes run, not from cowardice, but from contagion. They leave behind ruins, ashes, and silence because staying too long means falling. Not just physically, but spiritually. To dwell in a tainted world is to become part of it. To fight the warp too long is to invite its gaze. The Imperium's greatest warriors, its most loyal sons, are now haunted not by death, but by transformation. The fear that they might one day look into the mirror and see something else staring back. Something with horns. Something that remembers their name. This is the war they never speak of. The war not fought with chainswords and bolters, but with identity, memory, and hope. The Space Marines are running not from the enemy, but from the terrain of the soul. From the realization that the galaxy they fight for is being rewritten by something older, darker, and utterly alien. And all their valor, all their fury, might amount to nothing more than a scream swallowed by the warp. The Tyranids are unlike any enemy humanity has ever faced. They do not conquer, they do not negotiate, they do not even hate, they simply consume. When the Great Devourer arrives, it does not come with banners or ideology, it comes with hunger. A void that thinks only of biomass, that sees every world as a meal. And for all their power, all their courage, even the Adeptus Astartes find themselves outmatched by this cold, inhuman tide. They are not fighting a foe they can understand. They are fleeing from an intelligence so vast, so alien, that even the most war-hardened Marines feel something they are never meant to feel. Futility. The first encounters were shrugged off, isolated fleets, strange Xenos with peculiar biology. But that arrogance didn't last. Tyran was consumed. Makraj, the heart of Ultramar, bled in a battle that cost countless lives and barely held the line. Since then, the Hive fleets have only grown in number and complexity. Behemoth, Kraken, Leviathan, and now new tendrils emerging from the galactic fringes. And with each emergence, the Astartes are sent to slow them down, to delay the inevitable. Never to stop, never to win. Space Marines are built to be fearless. Their gene seed suppresses terror, trains them to see death as service. But the Tyranids bypass fear. They don't inspire dread by their appearance, they unravel purpose. You can't reason with them. You can't demoralize them. Every time a Hive ship is destroyed, the biomass is lost. But the consciousness behind it learns, adapts, evolves. The next time, they are faster, stronger, more precise. It's like fighting the tide with a sword. Every beachhead held is already underwater before the victory is declared. Veteran chapters have learned this the hard way. The Ultramarines, lauded for their discipline, now speak of Tyranids in hushed tones, not out of fear, but because they know what must be done. Defensive victories often end in exterminatus. The planet saved is the planet burned. There is no reclamation, no rebuilding. Only denial, a brutal triage of galactic proportions. Even the proudest chapters have shifted from glorious standoffs to extraction missions. Data retrieval, civilian evacuation, psychic beacon placement, all temporary acts. Nothing permanent, because permanence is the one thing the Tyranids always erase. There's something uniquely horrifying about how the Tyranids fight. It's not war, it's digestion. Worlds are scoured down to the molecular level. Oceans are boiled, atmospheres are drained, even the dead are devoured. Marines who fall in battle risk having their sacred gene seed consumed, their very essence fed to the swarm. Apothecaries are now the most vital warriors on the field, tasked not just with saving brothers, but with denying the Tyranids what they seek. Death is not the end, being eaten is. And then there is the shadow in the warp, the psychic scream that precedes a Tyranid invasion. It silences astropaths, severs navigation, leaves entire sectors deaf and blind. Space Marines deployed into such zones go in knowing they are alone, no reinforcements, no retreats. They descend into a void where thought itself bends, where the Emperor's light cannot reach. The chaplains speak of faith, the tech Marines keep the systems running, but everyone knows the truth. They are already ghosts, buying time in a dead zone. This is the running that matters most. The reason the Space Marines are always moving. They cannot hold what cannot be held. Every time the Tyranids arrive, something must be left behind. A city, a world, a brother. Sometimes the entire campaign ends not with a victory, but with coordinates relayed to the Inquisition for exterminatus. And the Astartes board their Thunderhawks, wounded, fewer in number, knowing they didn't win, they just survived. And that survival came at a cost so steep it might never be paid back. There is no glory in fighting the Tyranids, only the grim acceptance that someone must do it. And so the Space Marines run, not away from the enemy, but ahead of it. They run to be the bulwark, the firebreak, the temporary wall that slows the hunger for just a moment more. So that somewhere, someone else might live another day. Because the Tyranids are not a war. They are the end of war. And when they come, even angels must flee. The galaxy remembers the Necrons as myths, ancient kings entombed in silence, sleepers beneath the dust of forgotten worlds. But they are waking. Slowly, inexorably, they rise from beneath the crust of planets thought safe, and when they do not announce themselves with fire or fury, but with reclamation. The terrifying truth Space Marines have come to know is this: the Imperium never truly owned the galaxy. It was borrowed, squatted upon, built atop graves too old to be remembered. And now the true owners are returning to collect. The Necrons are not an invasion, they are an awakening. They do not come to conquer. They come to reclaim what was once theirs. Their worlds, their stars, their silence. Each tomb world that stirs is a cathedral of ancient dominion, and its custodians rise with purpose, not vengeance. They see humanity as vermin, not even enemies, just infestations. And for all their martial might, the Space Marines find themselves woefully outmatched when the Necron tire rise in force. Bolters are answered by Gauss. Tactics are shredded by unthinkable technology. They are not fighting a foe, they are resisting a correction. The most chilling thing about the Necrons is their patience. Unlike the Tyranids or the forces of chaos, they do not swarm or overwhelm. They emerge slowly, methodically, one world at a time. Testing, probing. They send forth legions of immortal warriors, unfeeling and unrelenting, backed by weapons that defy Imperial science. What begins as a minor skirmish becomes an annihilation. And when the Marines try to return with reinforcements, they find only sand, metal, and nothing. As if the battle never happened. As if the Necrons withdrew deliberately, not because they were pushed back, but because they learned all they needed to. Space Marine chapters that specialize in siege warfare or technological warfare fare slightly better. The Iron Hands, the Adeptus Mechanicus aligned Red Scorpions. But even they cannot keep pace. Necron constructs rewrite the battlefield in seconds. Terrain shifts, reality bends. Entire companies are lost to phase dimensions, trapped between pulses of energy they cannot comprehend. And worse, the Marines realize that their enemy does not age, does not fatigue, does not fear. The Necrons are not fighting for survival. They are enacting a will older than the stars themselves. Many chapters report strange encounters, moments when the Necrons seem to study them rather than destroy them. Probes that test genetic structure, cryptic hieroglyphs that respond to Imperial symbols, even attempts at communication swiftly covered up by the Inquisition. The truth is this: the Necrons know the Space Marines. They remember them, not as individuals, but as a phenomenon. They've seen the rise and fall of countless species, and they recognize the Astartes not as warriors, but as symptoms of a collapsing empire. And symptoms are to be excised. Entire planetary campaigns have shifted from defense to denial. Space Marines now fight to destroy key data, to bury archaeotech, to collapse caverns before the Necrons can rise. They are not trying to win. They are trying to delay awareness, to prevent the Necron tire from understanding just how far humanity has spread, and how weak its defenses truly are. It's a desperate attempt to blind a sleeping god before it opens its second eye. And it is failing. The psychological toll is severe. These are not Xenos that can be killed in righteous fury. They do not scream, they do not bleed, they do not even hate. They simply advance, erase, and move on. Space Marines trained to feel purpose in destruction find themselves hollow. You cannot slay a tomb, you cannot terrify a statue. The Astartes find themselves reduced, not as warriors, but as trespassers, interlopers in a galaxy that never belonged to them. And that realization cuts deeper than any Gauss flare. So the Space Marines run, not from the Necrons themselves, but from the truth they represent. That humanity's claim to the stars is a fiction. That the golden banners of the Imperium are planted in soil that already bears another's name. And as more tombs stir, as more black monoliths rise from beneath the ground, the Space Marines find themselves not in the age of man, but in its twilight. The Necrons are not a threat, they are a reminder that the stars were never ours. There's a moment every loyalist Space Marine dreads. Not the clash with a daemon, nor the charge against impossible odds, but the sound of a voice that mirrors their own. A voice distorted, corrupted, but unmistakably familiar. The voice of a traitor. The forces of chaos are not merely enemies. They are reflections, broken and bloodied, of what the Astartes might become. The heretic Astartes, the fallen legions of Horus, are more than threats, they are warnings. And in every battle against them, the loyalist does not just fight a foe, he fights a future. The traitor legions are the ghosts of the Great Crusade, warriors who once stood beside the emperor and then turned, not because they were weak, but because they saw a different truth. Each one bears the scars of betrayal, the weight of purpose lost, the word bearers still preaching, the night lords still punishing, the emperor's children still seeking perfection. These are not alien minds, they are familiar horrors. The loyalist sees in them the paths they never took, but could have. And that knowledge is a poison that never leaves. To fight the Black Legion is to face a mirror of purpose twisted. They are still conquerors, still tacticians, but now they wage war not to unify humanity, but to break it. To show the Emperor that loyalty was a lie. Abaddon, the self-proclaimed War Master of Chaos, is not mad, he is determined. Each Black Crusade, even the ones that fail, tears at the fabric of the Imperium. And the loyalist Marines sent to stop him often do so with clenched teeth and silent doubts, because Abaddon was once a son of Horus. And many wonder, what if Horus had been right? The Thousand Sons pose an even deeper threat. They do not just fight, they unmake. Their sorcery defies reality. Their rubrici march silently, reminders of the soul's fragility. For the Space Marines, so bound by discipline and flesh, the Thousand Sons are a horror story of potential gone wrong. What is the value of honor when knowledge can turn to ash? What is the price of understanding? Librarians tread a fine line. Every psychic push risks tipping into the same abyss that claimed Magnus and his sons, and every battle against them whispers, "This could be you." Perhaps the most personal foe are the Death Guard. Once the proud sons of Mortarion, now they rot and laugh in the name of Nurgle. To face them is to face endurance perverted. Space Marines are supposed to be immune to disease, paragons of resilience. But against the Death Guard, their immunity is tested, and sometimes broken. Plagues that defy science, wounds that do not heal, spirits that break under the stench of decay. And in that suffering lies a terrible empathy. Loyalists see in the Death Guard not just traitors, but brothers who lost their way in pain. The World Eaters, driven mad by Khorne, are not enemies to be outmaneuvered. They are hammers of carnage. To stand against them is to stand against rage incarnate. And for Astartes who pride themselves on discipline, this is the most terrifying thing of all, to see what happens when the leash snaps. The butcher's nails that pump fury into the World Eaters' skulls are not so different from the hypno-indoctrination used in loyal chapters. What separates the berserker from the brother? A chemical? A prayer? A moment? Even lesser-known warbands bear this shadow. The Red Corsairs, once loyal astral claws, the Purge, the Scourged, each one a cautionary tale, each one a whisper of doubt. The Imperium teaches that loyalty is absolute, that the Emperor's will is infallible. But the traitor Marines are proof that loyalty can be broken, and when it breaks, it doesn't vanish. It metastasizes, it festers, and it fights back. And this is why the Astartes run. Not from fear of death, they are beyond that, but from fear of themselves, of what they could become. Every time they face the traitors, they face the edge of their own ideology. Every time they clash with chaos, they chip away at certainty. The longer they fight, the more they wonder, why are we loyal? What are we protecting? Who still believes? Because chaos doesn't just fight the Imperium, it infects the soul. And Space Marines, though engineered to resist, are still men. Transhuman, yes, but not gods. And in the dark between battles, some of them look at the stars and wonder, what would it take to fall? That is the most terrifying part of all. Not that the traitor legions exist, but that, in the right light, they make sense. The Codex Astartes is often held up as the sacred scripture of the Adeptus Astartes, a compendium of wisdom written by Robert Guilliman himself, dictating how the Space Marines should wage war, organize, and think. It is revered, quoted, and enforced. But beneath its pages lies something far more insidious, not just doctrine, but control. The truth many refuse to speak aloud is this: the Codex was never just about tactics. It was about chains, political, ideological, and operational shackles placed upon the greatest warriors of mankind. And it has shaped their fate ever since. When Guilliman penned the Codex after the Horus heresy, it was under the guise of preventing future betrayal. The legions were too large, too autonomous, too dangerous. And so, they were broken. Fragmented into chapters, each limited to 1,000 warriors. Their fleets divided, their cultures siloed. No more demigod generals commanding star-spanning armies. Only isolated brotherhoods, reliant on imperial bureaucracy for reinforcements, supplies, and information. It was a leash disguised as structure, and the leash has held for 10,000 years. For many chapters, the Codex is gospel. They follow it with religious fervor, not realizing that in doing so, they are sacrificing flexibility, initiative, and often survival. Entire worlds have been lost because a chapter refused to violate the Codex's limitations. Reinforcements withheld, assets hoarded, requests ignored because the Codex does not allow deviation. And those who do adapt, the Black Templars, the Space Wolves, the Minotaurs, are viewed with suspicion or outright hostility. Innovation is punished, uniformity is rewarded. But in a galaxy that changes faster than doctrine can keep pace, that rigidity is not discipline, it is suicide. Space Marines are taught that their strength lies in their devotion to duty, their adherence to ancient wisdom. But that wisdom was born of fear, not foresight. Guilliman feared another Horus, and so he clipped the wings of every Astartes who came after. And now, with Guilliman returned in the era of the Endless Crusade, even he sees the cracks. The Codex is evolving. Primaris reinforcements have shaken the old structures. The chapter system is being stress-tested to its limits. But still, the inertia of millennia holds sway. Chapters follow the Codex because it's safe, because it tells them who they are, because without it, they might have to think for themselves. There is another layer, deeper still. The Codex doesn't just dictate battle formations, it molds identity. It tells a Marine what it means to be loyal, to be righteous, to be a hero. And in doing so, it narrows their world. A Devastator is taught to see value in patience and positioning. An Assault Marine learns glory through movement and speed. These identities, carved into them from creation, become prisons. To question them is to question one's very purpose. And in a galaxy where purpose is often the only thing keeping a Marine from madness, few dare to stray. But the warfront does not care for doctrine. The enemy does not care for purity. And so, more and more, chapters find themselves bending the Codex out of necessity, sharing intelligence across forbidden boundaries, forming ad hoc battle groups, operating beyond their numerical limits. Some even barter with the Inquisition, the Adeptus Mechanicus, the rogue traders, seeking allies the Codex would never condone. And in that bending lies the truth. The Codex was never a shield, it was a muzzle. This is why the Astartes are always moving. Not just because the galaxy demands it, but because they are not allowed to be anything else. They cannot settle, they cannot govern, they cannot truly lead. They are warriors on a leash, dispatched as needed, celebrated when useful, forgotten when inconvenient. If they were allowed to stay, to build, to command, they might become something more than soldiers. They might become threats. And so the Codex keeps them in motion, keeps them running. Not from fear, but from becoming what the Imperium truly dreads, independent. A free Space Marine is not a servant, he is a king. And kings are dangerous. This is the truth buried beneath the Codex's sacred lines. It is not a scripture of wisdom. It is a blueprint for containment. And the Space Marines, whether they admit it or not, are its prisoners. There are chapters that burn bright in the Imperium's myths. The Ultramarines, the Blood Angels, the Space Wolves. But for every name chanted in cathedral halls, there are a dozen others whispered only in mourning. The forgotten, the vanished, the betrayed. Space Marines who were not celebrated, but erased. Worlds they bled for, never remembered. Crusades ended not in glory, but in silence. This is the true horror behind the legend, that even the angels of death are disposable. Across the Imperium, there are entire sectors once defended by Astartes who are now gone. Not honored, not avenged, simply gone. Some were lost to the warp, their ships vanishing in storms that no astropath could pierce. Others were overwhelmed by Xenos or daemons, their final transmissions filled with static and screams. A few dared to question their orders, to deviate from the Codex, to protect instead of destroy, and were quietly disbanded, or declared excommunicate traitorous. The Imperium does not mourn them, it erases them. Think of the Sons of Antaeus, a chapter known for their immense durability and unorthodox methods. Where are they now? Some say they still fight, hidden, unsupported, deemed too strange by high lords too afraid to admit what works. The Steel Cobras, rumored to have vanished in a purge orchestrated not by enemies, but by fellow Imperials. The Firehawks, lost in the warp and reborn, twisted into the Legion of the Damned, spectral warriors who now appear only in the darkest moments, as if summoned by forgotten debts. The Lamenters are perhaps the most tragic of all. Heroes cursed by fate, reviled by bureaucrats, sent on impossible missions again and again until their numbers dwindled to whispers. Their only sin was compassion. Too much humanity in a body not meant to feel it. And for that, they were exiled, cut off, thrown into the meat grinder of forgotten wars. They did not fall. They were pushed. And no one came to pull them back. These lost chapters represent a grim truth, that the Imperium's greatest warriors are only useful so long as they serve the narrative. As soon as they deviate in method, in morality, in memory, they are erased. No tombs, no monuments, just the silence of command, records sealed by inquisitorial decree. And the Space Marines know this. They know that if they fall too far from favor, they will be cast into the same darkness they swore to hold at bay. Even more terrifying is the fate of those who survive their abandonment. Chapters left behind after crusades are sometimes left with no support, no reinforcement, no acknowledgement. They are presumed dead, or worse, are simply deemed irrelevant. Some turn rogue, becoming mercenary bands. Others become zealots clinging to shattered creeds. A few simply vanish, continuing their wars in isolation, forgotten even by their brothers. These aren't deserters. They are orphans, cut off by a parent too busy dying to notice. What kind of empire treats its champions this way? What kind of Imperium casts off its finest sons the moment they ask questions, the moment they bleed in silence? The answer is one that values image over reality, one that cannot afford to show weakness, even when it costs strength, one that fears the independent mind more than the alien blade. And so the Astartes are left to die in the dark, their sacrifices unrecorded, their names unspoken. This is another reason the Space Marines are always moving. If they stay too long, if they ask too many questions, if they linger on the cost, they risk becoming one of the forgotten. To be remembered is to remain useful. To hesitate is to disappear. Every world they save might be the last. Every campaign might end not in celebration, but in oblivion. And they know it. So they keep running. Not because they are afraid of the enemy, but because they are afraid of being forgotten, of becoming just another name lost in the static. Another chapter that died not in failure, but in silence. Victory is the Imperium's most precious illusion. Broadcast across Vox Hails, carved into stone by scribes and sung by choir serfs in basilicas, it is the lifeblood of morale and a calculated deception. The truth is this: most victories claimed by the Imperium are not triumphs, but euphemisms for survival, for retreat, for annihilation rebranded. Nowhere is this clearer than in the campaigns waged by the Adeptus Astartes. For every banner raised, there are 100 unmarked graves. For every lauded hero, 1,000 names lost. Victory is not what it seems. It is a mask worn over failure. The propaganda machine of the Imperium is unmatched. It can turn defeat into martyrdom, massacre into holy purge, genocide into cleansing. When a chapter is wiped out, holding a planet against impossible odds, the scribes do not record it as a loss. They immortalize it as glorious sacrifice. When a world is subjected to exterminatus because it could not be saved, the reports speak of spiritual purity restored. And when Space Marines vanish without explanation, it is said they continue the fight elsewhere, always elsewhere. The truth is not permitted, because the truth would break the spine of the Imperium's narrative. For the Astartes, this is a quiet torment. They know the truth. They live it. They land on planets already lost, fight wars they know cannot be won, and are ordered to claim victory not through dominance, but through endurance. To hold long enough for the administratum to draft a new story. To bleed long enough for the ecclesiarchy to sanctify their deaths. Their battlefield reports are doctored. Their losses minimized. Their demands for aid ignored if they contradict the official line. It is not just that they die, it is that they die unheard. Some chapters fight with this knowledge buried deep. The Ultramarines, ever the paragons, embrace duty and decorum, even when they know the lies. Others resist it in subtle ways. The Raptors modify their tactics to preserve lives, not optics. The Carcharodons arrive unannounced, leave without report, refusing to play by the Imperium's narrative rules. The Lamenters once tried to tell the truth, and paid for it in blood. Their fate is now the warning whispered across Vox channels: speak the truth and be silenced. This propaganda is not just external, it infects the mind. Recruits are raised on tales of invincible heroes and eternal victories. They step into battle believing in righteousness, only to find ash and silence. For many, the first kill is not the hardest part, the first lie is. When the campaign ends and the survivors are paraded as victors, despite the mountains of dead behind them, something fractures. Some hide it. Others become zealots, shouting louder to drown the dissonance. And a few fall into grim resignation, seeing themselves as expendable tools in a script they didn't write. The cruelest victories are those where none remain to speak of them. Space Marines who complete suicidal missions, disabling a Necron beacon, collapsing a Chaos portal, severing a Tyranid synapse link, only to die in the act. Their deeds are unknown, their victories unclaimed, and yet the Imperium records them as part of some grand design, as if it was all foreseen, all part of the plan. The Astartes are not actors in these narratives. They are scenery, blood on the stage to make the monologue more compelling. This is why they keep moving, why they do not stay to celebrate. Because they know the moment the fighting ends, the rewriting begins. The Vox officers start filtering communications, the scribes start drafting lies, the chaplains start composing speeches that mention the Emperor more than the fallen. And the Space Marines, these avatars of war, feel the sting of irrelevance. Not because they failed, but because their real story does not fit the myth. They are not just running from enemies, they are running from narratives. From the machinery of denial that turns their pain into poetry. They run because if they stay, they will be turned into statues before they are even cold. Because the only thing worse than dying for a lie is living to see it repeated. And so, the Astartes move on, campaign to campaign, battle to battle, not chasing victory but fleeing from what it's become. The arrival of the Primaris Marines was heralded as a rebirth, the salvation of the Adeptus Astartes. Clad in Mark X armor, wielding new weapons, bearing fresh gene seed stabilizations, they emerged from the shadows of Khal's forges like demigods reborn. The Imperium celebrated, the High Lords sighed in relief, and the Space Marines, the original Astartes, stood in silence, because they understood what the rest of the galaxy refused to admit. The Primaris were not a triumph. They were an apology, a confession, proof that the old model was breaking. The creation of the Primaris was not a gift, it was a panic response. Centuries of secret work launched not in honor of the Astartes, but in anticipation of their obsolescence. Even Guilliman's return, that miracle of miracles, was not enough. The Endless Crusade was born not from confidence, but desperation. The Imperium needed warriors who could do more, endure more, obey more, and so it made new ones. Better ones, at least on paper. Taller, stronger, faster, as if war could be solved by physique. For many of the old chapters, the integration of Primaris Marines was a wound that never healed. The Blood Angels saw their gene line diluted, their traditions upended. The Space Wolves snarled against the change, resisting what they saw as an artificial graft. Even the Ultramarines, Guilliman's own sons, whispered of replacements. The unspoken fear ran deep. Were they still necessary? Were they still good enough? Was this the first step toward erasure? The Primaris themselves carry their own burden. Created in secret, indoctrinated from birth with filtered memories and artificial traditions, they step onto the battlefield without the weight of history. And because of that, they are suspect. Their loyalty is unquestioned because it has never been tested. Their valor is engineered. Their brotherhoods formed in sterile environments, not on battlefields soaked in blood. To many veterans, they are not brothers. They are copies. And no matter how many wars they fight, that shadow never leaves them. But more than resentment, the arrival of the Primaris Marines represents a deep, structural truth. The Imperium does not believe the Astartes can keep up. Not as they are, not as they were. The warp storms grow, the Tyranid tendrils tighten, the Necrons rise. And the Astartes, once the cutting edge, now struggle just to respond. Reinforcement becomes replacement. Valor becomes redundancy. Chapters that cannot adapt are consolidated. Battle lines once held by storied companies are now garrisoned by fresh-faced Primaris who see history as something to be streamlined. This isn't an evolution. It's an erasure. Slowly, inexorably, the legacy of the original Space Marines is being rewritten. Monuments once carved for the Crimson Fists now feature rivers and intercessors. Recruitment worlds are reassigned. Ancient relics once sacrosanct are repurposed. The Codex Astartes is amended to fit new formations, new doctrines, new ideals. And those who question it, those who remember how it used to be, they are told to adapt or be left behind. Some chapters have embraced this transformation. The Black Consuls, the Nova Marines, the Silver Templars, they see themselves as the future. Others have fractured. The Celestial Lions, once proud, now stand divided on the very concept of identity. And still others vanish quietly, their gene seed harvested, their relics sealed away, their names lost in administrative obscurity. Not with fire, not with heresy, but with bureaucracy. This is why the Astartes are always moving. Not just because war demands it, but because home is no longer theirs. The Fortress Monastery is not a sanctuary, it is a museum. The Gene Vault is a shared resource. The banner once held aloft in glory is now archived for future review. There is no place to stay, no tradition that isn't under revision. They run because they are being outpaced by a future designed without them. And the bitter truth? Some of them understand, some of them agree. They look at the scale of the threat and know that even they, the angels of death, the sons of gods, are not enough. But that doesn't make the pain go away. That doesn't make the silence any less loud. And so the old guard runs, not in shame, not in failure, but in mourning, because the galaxy they were made for no longer exists, and the Imperium they bled for no longer wants them. The Black Templars do not believe in retreat, they do not garrison, they do not fortify, and they do not end campaigns, they only crusade. To the casual observer, they are icons of faith incarnate, the burning spear of the Emperor's vengeance. But beneath the litanies and the fury lies a deeper, more unsettling truth. The Black Templars keep crusading because they have nowhere left to go. Their endless war is not just devotion, it is denial. They are running forward because behind them is a silence too loud to bear. Unlike other chapters, the Black Templars have no homeworld. Their fleet-based nature is often celebrated as a strategic flexibility, a sign of their commitment to the Emperor's mission. But this too is myth. They have no home because they cannot afford one. A static fortress, a fixed seat of power, would invite scrutiny, politics, accountability, and most dangerously, reflection. The Templars do not build because they are not builders. They are destroyers, and they know it. Their zealous nature shields them from many of the existential questions that plague other chapters. Where others ask why they fight, the Templars recite oaths. Where others question the Imperium's methods, the Templars purge the doubters. But this fanaticism is not ignorance. It is armor. It is the only way they can survive the dissonance of a galaxy that no longer makes sense. Every new crusade is a reaffirmation of identity. Every holy war is a refusal to sit still long enough for the doubts to catch up. And there are doubts. Deep ones. The Templars are aware of the decay. They see the corruption in the ecclesiarchy, the stagnation in the High Lords, the hypocrisy of those who preach but do not bleed. But they bury these truths beneath ritual and blood. They do not seek to reform the Imperium, they seek to purify it through fire. They reject diplomacy, negotiation, nuance. These are the luxuries of the decadent. For the Templars, there is only one truth, the sword. This creates a paradox. The Black Templars, in their pursuit of purity, are some of the most unbound of all the chapters. They often ignore the Codex Astartes. They swell their numbers beyond prescribed limits. They form warbands and fighting companies so vast they rival the old legions. And yet, they remain loyal. Not because they obey, but because they believe. And in this belief, they become terrifying. Not just to their enemies, but to their allies. Other chapters look at the Templars with a mix of awe and fear. The Ultramarines see them as outliers, the Dark Angels as loose cannons. The Inquisition watches them constantly, torn between admiration and suspicion. Because the Templars do what no one else dares, they fight without end. They take the war to the stars, not in defense, but in aggression. And that aggression is a mirror the Imperium would rather not look into. But the Templars look. They look into the void and see only duty. They do not seek rest. They do not want peace. Peace would mean acknowledgement of loss, of compromise, of change. And the Templars cannot afford to change. They are relics of an age that never truly existed. Crusaders fighting for a dream that died before they were born. Their purity is not strength, it is fossilization, a beautiful burning stasis. This is why they do not stop. This is why they cannot stop. To stop would mean looking inward. And what would they find there? Regret? Doubt? The realization that the emperor they worship is a silent corpse on a broken throne? No. Better to crusade. Better to fight and bleed and scream until the galaxy is reduced to ash. Because in the fire, there are no questions, only purpose. And so the Black Templars run. Not from fear, not from defeat, but from reflection. From a world that asks them to become something other than what they are. They run because if they slow down, even for a moment, the silence will speak. And they fear what it might say. They are not just the Emperor's wrath, they are his denial, his inability to grieve, his refusal to change. The Black Templars do not fight for the future, they fight so that the past can burn forever. There was a time when the Space Marines stood for a future, not just a defense against annihilation, but a promise that something greater was possible. The Emperor's vision, flawed though it was, aimed at unity, enlightenment, and strength through understanding. The Great Crusade at its heart was not just war. It was expansion, exploration, even hope. But that hope is gone. What remains is a legacy of warriors too proud to change, too sacred to discard, and too broken to admit they no longer know what they fight for. What does it mean to be an angel of death in an age where there's nothing left to protect? The Imperium is not growing. It is rotting in place, its bureaucracy choking the stars, its religion drowning out its reason. The Space Marines, made to be champions of a rising human tide, now exist as glorified janitors of a crumbling ruin. They respond to emergencies, extinguish rebellions, delay the inevitable. But they no longer build, they no longer envision. They are the blades without sheaths, swinging endlessly in shadows that never end. The spiritual decay runs deeper than any heresy. Many chapters no longer remember why they fight. Their prayers are empty repetitions. Their rites of initiation brutal echoes of ancient trials whose meaning has long since been lost. Some have become caricatures of their own myths, obsessed with vengeance, martyrdom, or purity. Others drift into nihilism, using the Emperor's silence as justification for their own. A few, like the Black Shields or the Death Watch detachments, exist entirely in liminal space, neither bound to a chapter nor fully free. Warriors who have lost not only their homes but their names. The psychological toll of 10,000 years of endless war is not just measurable in casualties. It is seen in the eyes of chaplains who no longer believe in the sermons they preach. In captains who stare too long into the void between stars. In apothecaries who begin to question whether preserving gene seed is worth more than preserving lives. There are no leave rotations, no peace treaties, no respite. The Space Marines are not meant to live long, but they do, and they carry their battles with them. Even their dreams betray them. Those few Astartes who still dream, often the youngest, not yet hardened by decades of fire, speak of a galaxy healed, of brotherhood without slaughter. But these dreams are stamped out quickly, not with cruelty, but with pity, because those dreams are dangerous. They invite questions, and questions are heresy. The oldest Space Marines remember the heresy. Some even remember the Great Crusade. They carry memories of a time when the stars felt open, when victory seemed possible. And that memory is a curse, because they see the gap between what was and what is. They see the truth, that the Imperium is not a beacon, it is a bunker. And the Astartes are its dying flares. There are no new ideologies among the chapters, no philosophies rising from battlefields, no visions proposed, only echoes. The Imperial fists build walls, the iron hands replace flesh, the white scars chase the horizon, but none of them create something new. They are trapped in cycles, repeating doctrines like mantras to ward off the truth. And that truth is this: they are not fighting for the future. They are fighting so that the past does not fully die. This is why the Space Marines run, not in cowardice, not in flight, but in ritual. Constant motion means never confronting the void. Perpetual war means never asking if there is another way. The bolter and chainsword are not just weapons, they are distractions. Holy tools of forgetting. The galaxy spins, burns, screams, and the Astartes march, because if they ever stopped, if they ever paused long enough to look inward, they might see that there is nothing left of the Emperor's dream except dust and duty. They are not warriors of light, they are torchbearers of a dying age, fighting not to win but to remind the stars that once, long ago, humanity tried, and failed, but refused to stop swinging. So now we see them for what they truly are. The Adeptus Astartes, not the infallible gods of war that the propaganda would have us believe, but haunted relics of a crumbling dream. They run not from fear, not from defeat, but from the terrible burden of being the last. The last to remember a time when humanity reached for the stars. The last to believe that the Emperor's vision meant something. The last to stand between the smothering dark and the fragile, flickering flame of survival. They are not fleeing the enemy, they are holding the firebreak. Every step back is a calculated choice. One more second bought, one more soul saved, one more memory preserved. In the eyes of the High Lords, they are assets. In the whispers of the ecclesiarchy, they are angels. But in truth, they are martyrs already burning. They know their wars cannot be won. They know the threats they face, the Tyranids, the Necrons, the warp itself, are endless. And still they fight. Still they move. Still they run. And maybe that is the most human thing about them. For all their gene forging and ritual, their catechisms and armor, the Space Marines embody the most tragic aspect of mankind. Our refusal to give up, even when all reason says we should. Our stubborn grip on purpose, no matter how hollow it becomes. They are not saving the Imperium. They are not even saving themselves. They are giving humanity a few more generations of firelight before the night takes everything. This is the truth the Imperium hides. Not out of malice, but necessity. Because if the people ever knew what the Astartes know, if they understood the depth of the loss, the scale of the decay, they might stop believing. And belief, more than bolters, is what keeps the Imperium alive. So yes, the Space Marines are running, but they run so that we can crawl, so that the Hive Child might dream of something better, so that the Guardsmen might hold the line one more day, so that the stars might remember we were here. The Space Marines were never meant to be philosophers. They were not bred for introspection, not shaped for subtlety. They were built to serve, to act, to obey, weapons with memories. But the longer they fight, the more they live, the more cracks appear in their spiritual armor. 10,000 years of war is not a legacy. It is a scar across the psyche of a species, and the Astartes, more than any other, carry that trauma in silence. Beneath their armor, beneath the implants and oaths, they are men who were made into myths and then abandoned by the very myth that made them. There are moments, brief but real, when even the most hardened warriors falter. Not in battle, they are unwavering there, but in the stillness between deployments. In the quiet of orbit, in the solitude of deep void travel, when the chanting ceases and the mission is over. There, in the silence, something festers. Not fear, not doubt, something more insidious. A question that echoes without voice. Why? Not the tactical why, not strategy, not orders. The deeper why. Why keep going? Why preserve this Imperium of rot? Why burn their lives to feed a machine that does not know their names? No Codex Astartes prepares them for that question. No chaplain sermon can drown it out forever. Because sooner or later, every Space Marine, if he lives long enough, confronts the hollowness. He looks upon a world saved at terrible cost, only to watch it fall again a decade later. He sees statues built to honor his battle brothers, even as those names are mispronounced or forgotten. He watches as civilians fear him more than they revere him. And he begins to suspect, quietly, guiltily, that the dream he was made to protect is already dead. There is no counseling, no grief leave, no sanctuary for the mind. Astartes who falter are sent on penitent crusades, buried in the ranks of the Death Watch, or simply marked missing during the next hopeless campaign. It is easier to erase a broken Marine than to mend him. Easier to martyr him than to understand what went wrong. The apothecaries measure their blood, the chaplains monitor their zeal, the tech Marines maintain their armor. But no one tends their soul, because the Imperium does not believe they have one. And yet they do. You can see it in the way some of them linger over relics, not in prayer, but in memory. You can see it in the way veterans touch the walls of their strike cruisers, like blind men seeking shape in steel. You can hear it in the rare, unguarded stories they share, of comrades long dead, of battles where something beautiful was lost. Not victories, not kills, moments, a ruined garden, a child's drawing on a war-torn wall, a city that chose to resist, not for glory, but for each other. These are not thoughts of angels. They are the thoughts of men who have seen too much and been allowed to feel too little. Some chapters lean into ritual to protect themselves. The Iron Hands bury grief under circuitry. The Black Templars scream their pain into war hymns. The Blood Angels, oh, the Blood Angels, paint their agony in red and gold and let madness dress itself as nobility. But the pain remains, hidden, masked, weaponized. It does not leave. It corrodes from within, and still they are expected to endure, to fight without question, to kill without hesitation, to never break. But what breaks is not always loud. It is not always a scream or a betrayal. Sometimes it is silence. A Marine who fights with perfect efficiency but never speaks. One who obeys orders but no longer volunteers. One who no longer paints kill markings or writes oaths of moment. These are not signs of heresy. These are signs of hollowing. The soul being quietly worn down by too many years of watching the same war play out with different names. Even the Primaris are not immune. For all their enhancements, all their improved resilience, they too begin to see the futility. And they see it faster. Perhaps because they were born into the Imperium as it is, not as it once was. They do not remember a brighter age. They have no illusions to lose, only confusion to gain. And in some ways, that makes their unraveling faster. They question why they are sent to die for planets that will fall within the century. Why they are told the Emperor speaks when all they hear is static. Why they are asked to carry the legacy of warriors they were never allowed to know. The tragedy is not that the Space Marines suffer. It is that they are not allowed to grieve. That they are not allowed to change. They must remain as they were. Eternal, loyal, unyielding. But nothing in the galaxy remains unchanged. Not even stone. And so they fracture, quietly, elegantly, like statues weathered by time until one day they crumble without a sound. This is why they keep running, not just from enemies, not just from memories, but from the moment when they will be forced to stop, to look inward, to reckon with what they have become. Because that moment, that mirror, is more terrifying than any tyrannid, any demon, any heretic. It is the moment when the Space Marine realizes that he is not just a weapon, not just a myth. He is a man, and the galaxy has never had room for men like him. The deeper one travels into the void, the more silent it becomes, not just in sound, but in meaning. The Space Marines, for all their martial brotherhood and ritualized camaraderie, are profoundly alone. Not just separated from the Imperium they serve, but from the very species they were made to protect. It's a chasm that cannot be crossed with drop pods or storm bolters. It is the gap between myth and humanity, and the longer a Marine lives, the more that gap widens until there is nothing left but silence and duty. They do not age as mortals do. They do not marry, do not raise children, do not participate in the ebb and flow of human experience. The very thing that makes them powerful also exiles them. They are worshipped by citizens who will never understand them, obeyed by commanders who fear them, revered by priests who twist their deeds into parable. They are sacred, and sacred things are never touched. They are never spoken to as equals. They are monuments that move. This isolation is not accidental. It is engineered. From the moment of their induction, the Astartes are severed from their past, their names stripped, their histories rewritten, their voices tuned to war. They are taught that detachment is strength, that emotional distance is purity, compassion is weakness, doubt is heresy, connection is vulnerability. And so they learn to amputate themselves from the human condition, not out of cruelty, but survival. To feel is to fracture, but feelings do not die. They fester. A Space Marine may no longer remember the face of his mother, but he will remember the ache of her absence. He may not recall the name of his village, but he will dream of it burning. These phantoms of identity are buried beneath layers of ceramite and litany, but they never vanish. In the stillness between campaigns, they rise. And in those moments, the Space Marine is not a weapon, he is a lost man wearing a dead boy's armor. The bonds between battle brothers are meant to fill this void, and sometimes they do. The shared rituals, the mutual sacrifices, the unspoken understanding of what it means to live only to die, these forge bonds stronger than blood. But even here, there is a limit, because no Marine dares speak of the deeper pains, the cracks in their resolve, the doubts about their purpose. Such things are not shared, they are carried. Alone. When a Marine falls in battle, his death is honored. His name inscribed, his gene seed retrieved, but his thoughts, his regrets, his secrets, these vanish with him. The Brotherhood does not weep, it does not linger. To grieve openly is to draw attention. To draw attention is to invite censure. And so the silence deepens. One by one, the voices fade, and the survivors learn to speak only in orders and oaths. Some chapters embrace this solitude fully. The Iron Hands have all but abandoned the idea of emotion, their machine logic reducing mourning to inefficiency. The Raven Guard operate in shadows, so deep they forget the sun. The Carcharodon speak a dialect no one else understands, perhaps because they no longer wish to be understood. These chapters are not cold, they are wounded. Isolation is not their strength, it is their scar. Even the chapters that maintain contact with the Imperium do so through layers of ceremony and dogma. The Salamanders, renowned for their empathy, still cannot truly integrate. They descend to help, but they do not stay. They save lives, but they do not touch them. Because they know what happens when a Marine lingers too long. He begins to want. He begins to feel, and feelings lead to attachment, and attachment leads to despair. This is the true cost of the Astartes transformation. Not the gene seed, not the armor, but the erosion of identity. They are not allowed to be men. They are not allowed to be human. They are allowed only to serve, to kill, to suffer, and to vanish. Their pain is not theirs, their legacy is not theirs. Even their names, once spoken with reverence, are eventually buried beneath new legends, new wars, new martyrs. They are, in every sense, alone. And yet they endure. Not because they are unfeeling, but because they have learned to carry their feelings like they carry their bolters, with discipline, with reverence, and without expectation of comfort. They do not ask for understanding. They do not seek companionship. They expect no reward. They only ask that they not be forgotten. And even that hope fades, battle by battle. This is why they run, why they never stay. Because to stay is to remember is to feel, and to feel is to collapse. So they move forward, always forward, chasing missions, chasing purpose, chasing the echo of something they cannot name, a place they have never seen, a home they will never have. They are not just the Emperor's angels, they are his ghosts. If you found truth in this tale, if you felt the tragedy, the honor, the weight of it all, then stand with us, subscribe, share this, let others see what the Imperium would rather you forget. Because stories are all we have left, and the truth, however grim, is worth hearing.